There are movies from my childhood that I love. Movies that stuck with me in ways that I find very touching, actually. The fact that Superman and Star Wars and Goonies and Gremlins and Robocop and Terminator and Back to the Future and Ghostbusters, the fact that these movies all came out in the 80s. I mean, I think there is a reason that the 80s, we have a hard time letting go of the 80s. I do. I think there's a reason for it. It was a very unique time. In some ways, I think the 80s was the last decade to have a real defining quality to it. I think the 90s did too, but by the end of the 90s, that had sort of tapered off. You know, the 90s started off with a very, like, if you, I'm sure, I can't wait to see the Captain Marvel movie because I'm sure they're going to really capture that, uh, what that 90s sort of essence was, what was unique about that time. But by the end of that decade, it had tapered off, and I feel like it's never really recovered. I feel like you could watch a movie from 1999. Like if you picked movies from like this movie came out in 1999, this movie came out in 2009, and this movie came out like this year, and you watched them and you mixed them up, and nobody knew which was which, right? And don't look at like the cell phone size of the cell phone and stuff like that. Just look at like the characters and all that. Fashion hasn't changed much. Hairstyles haven't changed much. Attitudes haven't changed much. You know, I feel like those movies would all be kind of interchangeable. So when there is a movie that just stands out because of the time it was made, I think that that is, a lot of people will say it's dated. I think it's charming. And charming is exactly the word for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I have here a, really right now it just says Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. But as you can see, I mean, I've got those movies and the bonus disc. I've got the Bill and Ted animated show because it did have Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter come back and do the voices. And what's this? What's this right here? This empty spot. We'll get to that. I'm assuming you've all seen Bill and Ted. Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter play the titular heroes who are a couple of California surfer guys. People say they're stoners. You never really see that, though. You never really see them smoke weed. They've got like the surfer lingo. And I grew up in Southern California. I never really knew anybody like this in the 80s, but you know, they're stereotypes. They're what people assume Californians are. Um, and one day George Carlin comes from the future and tells them that they are going to be the saviors of humanity, that their stupid little rock band is going to somehow save the world, save the universe through music, through the power of rock. And but first they've got to pass their high school history test. And so he gives them this phone booth to travel back in time, and they use it to kidnap historical figures, bring them to the present to be for the least likely history report ever. First of all, they would not have the whole school gathered in an auditorium to listen to history reports. That wouldn't happen. But second of all, the fact that they had the lighting and the music cues and all that stuff set up, and you might say, well, they traveled in the future. In the future, they travel back into the past, and that's a gimmick that they use a lot in the movie. They have fun with the time travel premise. Um, Bill and Ted are just sweet characters. They're just nice guys. They're not. There's no angst. There's no. They're just nice people, and it's a movie about how the world can get better. The world can be saved, and that is a really positive thing to hear. Um, I love this movie. I think this movie works just as well now as it did when I was a kid, maybe better. Um, it is a movie that I rewatch every couple of years, and it just makes you feel good. You just smile through like the whole thing. Um, you know, this was sort of the role that Keanu Reeves was born to play, and I feel like while he's done some good stuff since then, nothing has really approached this. He's got a great sense of humor and a great sense of irony about himself, and I wish that that would come through more often instead of the stoic thing he tries to do. As much as I love John Wick, uh, and as much as I'm looking forward to John Wick 3, I'm looking forward to John Wick 3 to get out of the way so that they can finally film Bill and Ted Face the Music. It is one of my most anticipated movies. This sort of tying up this trilogy that I always thought should be a trilogy, and doing it in such a way that sounds really funny and really amusing, and having the two of them middle aged and they haven't saved the world yet, which I don't know how they're going to reconcile that with the end of the second movie, but I really look forward to it. Like them in the age of Trump, and these two guys who just want to do good, who just want to be, and they maybe are a little bit broken now because they're older and because they've got responsibilities and because they haven't saved the world yet. And they're just sort of this lounge band at this point, and it's just not happening for them. That sounds fantastic. I can't wait to see that movie. Whether or not it can top the original, that is a different story. It's got a real high bar to cross. I'm going to go ahead and say 5 out of 5 stars for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It is a great movie. It is, yes, it's dated. Okay, fine. But the message of be excellent to each other, that's timeless.